Hi, this is Jerome Davis. I'm the Artistic Director of Burning Coal Theater Company, and I'd like to welcome everybody to our video discussion. Today we'll be joined by Charles Grimes, who is instructor of theater at the Department of Theater, University of North Carolina, Wilmington. Charles has made the long drive up to Raleigh today to be with us to talk about Harold Pinter's work, to talk about our upcoming production of Moonlight, and to talk about his own career as a teacher and as a lover of Harold Pinter's writing. So Charles, welcome. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you for the opportunity.
So let's just dive right off the deep end and talk a little bit about Harold Pinter. Who was Harold Pinter in your estimation in the context of the theater in the 20th century?
I would rank Pinter very near the top, and we're seeing a new generation of playwrights that might be not as influenced by Pinter as others. But up through the 60s into the 2000s, he had a kind of commanding position and rose from being kind of stock actor to being someone whose plays were always an event, and were looked at by critics and scholars who found a kind of new mode of communication within drama. Just the idea that we were in a different world, a confusing world without orientation.
The different world being the
world of Pinter's plays, where all these characters live, and the sense that it's fluid and we can't ascertain what's going on or what ultimate definitions are. And Pinter brought that on stage and dramatized it fully in a way that everybody who looked at him said, that's new, that is something different.
We've not seen this before.
Yes.
Was it reflecting the post-industrial revolution era, do you think? Or what was he talking about?
I think it was. I think he was, influenced by, I think he was influenced by the Holocaust, which is still back there in so many of his plays. And he was a young man, young enough to understand what was happening and be affected by it as a boy, but also sort of understanding that there was this moment when it seemed like Western society had reached this endpoint where progression was not a given anymore, where everything that we thought was about meaning and civilization had somehow betrayed itself. And I think he understood that, and I think he understood from being a young Jewish boy in London, and certainly the victim of anti-Semitic words and violence. I think he understood that the world is this battlefield, and one has to find a place within certain obscure rules in order simply to survive.
So where did he start out? Was Pinter born in England? Or
He was born in England, in London, in a neighborhood called Hackney, which of course is now cool and hip, but used to be part of the East End and was dominated by a lot of Jewish families. At the time, his father was a tailor. Refugees from all across Europe. Pinter liked to take his family back to sort of Portugal. He thought that's where the origin was. But very lower middle class, striving to be middle class. Pinter sort of identified himself very early as someone who wanted to write, someone who had a verbal facility. His parents wanted him to have a more conventional job, and that was, and his sort of inability to absorb religion in the way they wanted him to, were conflict points, and he takes those conflicts and puts them right into Moonlight. And when he's talking about these two young boys, and they're talking about how society is going to set them up in this very sarcastic way, he's literally flashing back to him and his friends when they were teens trying to figure out a path forward that wasn't exampled in their family's past.
So this was all happening for him as a young man, concurrent with the rise of the government-supported institutional theaters. The Royal Court had begun in '56, which was not a theater that he had a lot of relationship with, but also the Royal Shakespeare Company was beginning. I mean, it had started somewhat earlier, but by the early '60s, late '50s, early '60s, it had begun to really lay claim to the mantle of the caretaker, to coin a term, of the English culture. And there was a clash there between the RSC and the National Theatre, which was starting up around the same time under the direction of Laurence Olivier, and then Peter Hall, who had started the RSC as we know it, took over the National Theatre. And those two big institutions became very significant in Pinter's development as an artist. Can you talk a little bit more about how those two institutions served him?
When his sort of entry into the big time was when he worked with Peter Hall at the RSC, and that play was the premiere of The Homecoming, 1965. And by that point, anyone who hadn't known about it, Pinter did, right? This was a gigantic hit and a major show, and he continued to work with Peter Hall, who founded some of the ideas about how to direct Pinter and how to deal with his plays. And before that, Pinter had kind of taken an interesting, more traditional route into theater and writing. He did go to the RADA, Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts, for somewhere between a hot second and 2 months, and he did not like what he was being given.
Too much structure?
Too much structure. I think they hadn't quite gotten the memo yet in these drama schools about letting people speak in their own dialect or accent.
Right.
He didn't like that. He didn't like the kind of old school British high culture thing. And I don't think I like being told what to do, and this is something he talks about a lot as a person and as a playwright. So he became kind of a jobbing actor, doing touring works in England and also in Ireland, and he kind of fell in love with Ireland for a while. He did a lot of Noel Coward plays. He did Shakespeare plays. As an actor. Right. He was literally the second spear carrier, right? And he worked with this gentleman named N.U. McMaster, who was an actor manager, right? Had his own troupe and told people where to stand and told people, get out of my light. I'm the star here. That's why I'm here.
I like the sound of this guy.
Yes, right? And Pinter learned a lot, and that's when he began writing, and he writes about just encountering images, and they live in his mind, and something about them had a pregnancy, a meaning, a potential that he saw in terms of human behavior, and then he just said, I'm going to write a play, and he did write a play. The first play was The Room, and he did Noel Coward, he did Agatha Christie mysteries, and some people think he kind of like put them together as a combination in his style. And he adopted the stage name of David Barron. That was his deal, and he thought that was, at least something better than Harold Pinter. He had a girlfriend at that time. A little bit later, a woman named Jill Johnson. I've just been told this anecdote that when Pinter died and the burial happened, which was smaller than the public events, Jill Johnson, who played Mariah in the first production of Moonlight, that she threw herself on the grave and wept for David. So not Harold, but David. But he did inspire a lot of loyalty and following.
Can you talk a little bit about you talked about that people felt that when they saw a Pinter play that they were seeing something that they hadn't seen before. Is there a way to qualify that? What was it about his material that struck people as so unusual and odd? And I'm thinking about, for instance, Samuel Beckett, who was in that same era, at least would have been ahead of Pinter enough to be influential of him.
Yeah.
Did people perceive Beckett as an influence on Pinter? Did Pinter perceive that?
Most definitely. While later critics have kind of differentiated Pinter from the theater of the absurd,
Yeah.
Pinter saw Beckett as an example worth emulating and as an artistic vision that spoke to him. And I think it was the sense that someone can come on stage, and even if they talk about their past, even if they talk about their plans, we don't know if that's the real past. We don't know why they're behaving in the way that they are. There may be one or two indications why they're here right now doing something, but it's not a full story and we have to get the rest of it. Or we just have to resign ourselves.
How do we get the rest of it?
We just presume, we make some inferences, we make some guesses.
We the audience.
We, the audience and the readers, and we may say we were wrong, right? Or we have to function with the idea that there could be another version of reality that we haven't sussed out yet. And I think it was that he took from Beckett, and I think it was Beckett's kind of searching sense of, you know, the sketchy connections between individuals and the rest of the world, and how the contemplation of our experience never gives us, real knowledge that we can take forward, even though we can make, again, guesses. But it's all hypothesis.
I've often wondered too. It seems like so many of the writers of that generation were influenced by British music hall.
Yes.
The one that springs immediately to mind is The Entertainer.
Yes.
John Osborne's
Yes.
play that Olivier won an Oscar for in the film version. But I'm just wondering if there's a sense of that too, and I'm thinking about the musical aspect of that, as well as the dry humor that came out of there.
People absolutely make that connection, and I think it's a key to reading his dialogue, because it's all about picking up cues, and it's all about continuing a verbal game, almost like the Rosencrantz and Guildenstern from Stoppard's play, where it's, can you react to this? Do you go dry? Do you understand my joke, right? And Jewel and Warris and some other people who were just, part of this culture that Pinter certainly knew about. And there's not an exact American parallel, although maybe the early days of Abbott and Costello would also suffice, the kind of vaudeville entertainment.
Yeah.
So just the sense that the words could become musical, rhythmic, that something about their existence out there in the world, right, as you issue them, becomes part of a new reality.
I'm fascinated by the lingering parts of vaudeville that remain in our culture. This is a very direct one, but my understanding is that the Temple Theater down in Sanford, which is less than an hour from here, was an old vaudeville theater, and that there are a number of them around the state, which would have been part of the vaudeville circuit. Right. And there's something really interesting about those facades. There's a grandness to them that really jars against everything around it, basically. And so it was really like entering another world when you went to one of those places. And I feel like today, I was at a film the other day. I don't spend a lot of time in movie theaters these days, but I was at one the other day, and I was sitting in one of these big leather chairs with the big cup holders on either side.
Yes.
And put your feet up. I swear to God, I think there was a massage thing on the side. I didn't use it, but I'm pretty sure it was there. And I'm just thinking to myself, that's our world. That's not something different. But in the days of vaudeville, in the days of music hall, you really were picking yourself up out of your surroundings, out of your circumstances, and just through force of will, inserting yourself into this grand picture. And I feel like that in some ways Pinter maybe was pushing against that, was starting with that in his plays, but then pushing back against that idea. And I wonder if it came, I'm just going on and on here, so bear with me for a second, but I wonder if it came out of the Hackney background, the desire that he, like John Osborne, didn't feel like he was seeing on stage what he was seeing outside the theater.
Absolutely. And I love the idea of just going into a space, and there's an element of ritual to it. It's more decorated, it's more fancy, it's even more light. And I do think Pinter just had the idea, and it was true that like a lot of people just hadn't been seen on stage in British theater really up through the late 40s, right, almost into the 50s.
There were examples.
There were certainly,
few
yes.
and far between.
Yes.
As is true now, I think.
Yes.
For a brief time there in the
Yes.
film, I keep going back to film,
Yes.
which I know
Yes.
Pinter did a lot of,
Yes.
but I think of the films that were coming out, Sex, Lies, and Videotape, for instance, all of those kind of American avant-garde films that were coming out of the indie world, the Sundance Festival and things like that. And for about 20 years, they seemed on the verge of taking hold in our country, and then it feels like a curtain came down, and the big boys said, no, we'll take those films and we'll put them in screen 14 in our multiplex, and we'll have 6 people there, and that's it. And so all those little art houses and independent cinemas have started to go away too.
Yes.
And it's getting to the point where the theater, the legitimate theater, is the only thing left of that idea of bringing us into a collective place where we can experiment and where we can not be spoon-fed the answer to things. Let's talk about Moonlight a little bit. Moonlight was his last full play, I think is a good way to put it.
It is a good way to put it. It depends where you put a play like Ashes to Ashes, which can vary from 40 to 50 minutes.
Right.
But for me, both plays, and especially Moonlight, were so interesting to see Pinter contemplate his past and contemplate his present and mortality. And for me, it's such an insight, and he had this ability that you or I might not have, but like I'm going to say true artists do. It's kind of like looking into their own life, remembering it, and being utterly honest about it, right? And kind of being willing to drag up things from your unconscious, and things that make you sad, upset, angry. And I think the biography does feed into this play. He was going to see his mom at this time when the idea was just aborting, and she was in a facility, and obviously, right, died soon after. And he was thinking about mortality. He was again thinking about family from the viewpoint of being an older man, having some issues in his own first family, also having kind of a very supportive relationship with his wife, Anthony Fraser, and that family. And I think, he just got an image in his head of a man on his bed on his bed, dying, and thinking, well, how would I react to that based on all these things that are happening?
And how would the family around him react to it?
Yes.
As well. There's a wife, there are children, there's a mistress from the past, and there is someone else as well, the Bridget, which is being played in our production by Susanna Skaggs, who just came off stage in Arcadia 5 minutes ago. Susanna was offered by me, the producer, one of the 2 roles. Would you prefer Arcadia or would you prefer Moonlight? And she said, can I do both?
Yes.
And I said, do you mind only having 1 day off between them? And she said, no, I'm ready to go. And so I'm very excited about having Susanna back with us so soon after her exemplary work in Arcadia. The character of Bridget is a mystery on some level. She exists not quite in the same world as the other characters, I think.
She exists in what Pinter calls in stage directions a third space, a third place, and that has kind of theological overtones that are not wrong, at least to indulge as the beginning of some meaning. But she is in front of our eyes, she's existing. How we think if we think she's alive or how old she is, these things are all things we can guess or not. But we perceive that she's having a journey that kind of brings us to this spiritual world, maybe back to the real world, even though it's in maybe a place in that world where she's feeling a kind of aloneness in a more intense way than she even did perhaps in this family. But she is Bridget. I mean, she's trying to bridge these generations and these rifts that happen in the family between mother and father and these two sons who are here, who are adult sons, kind of failing at life, it seems, at this moment, or at least struggling with how to move forward, having grievances against their father that we can guess at, but that we can certainly look at Pinter's life and think about. So it's Bridget is trying to bring these things together.
So you think it's autobiographical in some way?
I do, and the interesting thing about Pinter is that he takes his autobiography and does such interesting things with it, right? So this, in thinking about his mother, he flashes to himself and flashes to his own kind of legacy as a person, and flashes to maybe what is one supposed to think when you're in this place where the culture says you need to accept this and you need to be a person who is good to those who are among you at the last time. And Pinter's saying, do I have to do that? Will I have to do that? Pinter's saying, no, no, I'm not.
Yeah.
Right? And then, the thinking about how your actions, Pinter sketches this romantic quadrangle in the play. He brings in this character who apparently he had an affair with, a woman, and apparently his wife also had an later affair with this woman, or at least it's talked about. And this becomes Pinter's attempt to think about this, the sequential effects of what we do on other people as that passes down the line and the choices we make.
Well, I want to go back to Bridget just for a second, because before we turn the cameras on, you and I were talking about who Bridget might be, and there are a couple of possibilities. Are that she's an estranged daughter. One is that she is a distant daughter, someone who simply is not interested in the family. She may be dead. But I thought of another couple of options while we were talking there. One is that she could be a child that never happened, one way or another.
Yes.
And another possibility is that she could represent a kind of feminine aspect of Pinter's own character, or of Andy's own character, the man in the play, who that was not allowed voice. And so I think I'm now starting to see other ways as I listen to you talk about this.
Oh, absolutely. Those seem spot on. And, I think Pinter understood he wasn't going to give you a disquisition on your own, but he knew, right, that there were roles that males were made to play, and that was only part of what's actually in our psyche.
Yeah, I would agree. Charles, you have a book.
I do have a book.
Which you can now display like in Vanna White fashion.
Yes.
Called Harold Pinter's Politics. The subtitle is A Silence Beyond Echo, which is a terrific idea for Pinter's work. And people, if they're interested, can buy this on, I guess, Amazon. Or
They can go on Amazon. It's a Kindle. It's a Nook as well.
I want to close by talking just a little bit about his Nobel speech. He was one of the few playwrights. We just had one from Scandinavia. Was it Sweden? Who just won? And I blanked on his name.
His name is. I had to look up his pronunciation. Njön Fosse.
Gesundheit.
Yes.
But Pinter was one of the very few playwrights to win the Nobel Prize for literature, and in doing so, he did not accept. He did not go to Stockholm, I guess, to accept the award, but he did record a video, which people can watch, and it is absolutely incendiary. I mean, he absolutely goes after his target mercilessly, and I love it. I love it. And I wonder if you could talk just a little bit about his politics and what led him to that moment, if you would care to hazard a guess.
And I think I do have a guess, and I do think one of the profound effects of these speeches, he took this opportunity. He wasn't going to just say thank you. He wanted to make a political event out of it. And he had a sort of anti-American set of feelings since the 50s, and he kind of understood maybe the massive con job that was happening when America began to go around the world saying we're bringing democracy here.
I would say anti-imperialist.
It's anti-imperialistic impulses we have that sort of are covered by the alibis that we are familiar with.
Right.
And Pinter said those alibis are
BS,
right, and BS, and he evolved a politics that sort of fastened on the power of American foreign policy, and the fact that it becomes by tricks of language and by acts of mass acceptance that this sort of ideology becomes something we're swimming in. We don't even know it. We just unknowingly accept it. And Pinter just kept on hammering it verbally, so that at least if you had an inkling that something was wrong, you would go to his speeches, you could go to his plays, and you could understand that there was a way to think about things differently. And in the moment we're living in right now, I think I know what Pinter would be saying.
You don't have to guess.
I don't have to guess, right? I mean, he would be talking about innocent civilians who are being injured and killed as we speak.
Yeah. About 50% of the population of Palestine is under 18.
That's right.
So you can't help it. I mean, there's no way to drop a bomb in that city and not kill a child.
Yes. Yeah.
I think, I guess my question, I was thinking of a quote. I think it was, what was his name? Helms? He had been the CIA director back in the 70s.
Oh, Richard Helms, yes.
Richard Helms, yeah, who I believe it was him who said in an interview, when everything the American public knows is wrong, we will have done our job.
Yes.
Which is a startling admission, and one that it's even more startling that people seem to not believe him.
That's correct. Is that once you ascend a certain level of people accepting, you could just even tell them that you've lied to them, and they will not believe you.
Maya Angelou, I believe, says when somebody tells you who they are, believe them.
Yes.
And we're not taking that warning at all. But I guess my last question would be, do you think Pinter's plays supported that work? A lot of his plays, The Homecoming, The Caretaker, certainly Moonlight, Ashes to Ashes, feel like they're much more about interpersonal relationships, about families, about very sort of narrow social conditions. Do you think that the broad assault on imperialism that is that speech, the Nobel speech, is led up to by his work, or do you think he was operating on a different track than his
I think Pinter was very honest that it did represent a partial new track, a veering off. I think his earlier plays, show us the operation of power. They give us a sense of how terrible and awful it is to see someone suffer for being in a group, for trying to be different.
Yeah.
And I think that those ideas were with him. I think things changed in the 80s when he sort of just had the same conversion a lot of us did, looking at the Reagan administration, just thinking
And Thatcher, too.
And Thatcher, and saying, I must do what I can to resist, both as a person and as a writer. And the plays got shorter, and they got explicitly political, but in an interesting way, not propounding ideas or an ideology, right? He wasn't doing the David Edgar thing of talking about socialism
Directly. Yeah.
Directly, that wasn't his thing. But and the idea I proffered in my book was that it's almost a reverse, dialectical reversal that Pinter does, where we're looking at these people, they're dissenting, they're trying to speak, and this is repeated over and over in the later plays, and they can't or they don't speak. And sort of understanding, and it's almost like they're sacrificed, right? They're sacrificed, they're treated cruelly, they're marginalized, they're killed because they tried to do or say something different. And so that's meant to give us the urge to say, someone has to pick up the baton, right? Mm-hmm. Someone has to do this.
An image that popped into my mind as you were talking was the idea of David Edgar or David Hare or Carol Churchill to some degree, maybe, although she might fit more into the Pinter category,
Mm-hmm.
but that their plays are wide-angle shots of the world, and Pinter's plays are tight close-ups on the individual who is being impacted by these policies.
And I think that focus, right, gives us the dignity of the human being. That's a key word in his speech. Yeah. And just seeing how that is in peril is something that we're supposed to react to.
Well, Charles Grimes, this was a delightful conversation. I think we could probably go until the video runs out. I don't know, do videos run out anymore?
Yeah, we don't.
There's no tape, there's no film, but thank you for doing it. I appreciate it very much, and it is greatly enjoyable to listen to you talk about what I guess is one of your favorite subjects.
Thank you.
One
yes,
of mine
it is
as well.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming.
Terrific.